Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be with you to continue our exploration of the year 1934 in blackball, a series which I call A Season in the Shadows. Part
Probably have to
two,
go out and come in again.
July through September. No, I'll live with it.
Okay.
The Battle of Pittsburgh. One of the constant features of the 1934 season, especially in the pages of the Pittsburgh Courier, was the ongoing battle between Cumberland Posey, owner of the Homestead Grays, and his counterpart with the Pittsburgh Crawfords, Gus Greenlee. Posey was an athlete and a baseball man who first joined the Grays as a sandlot player in 1911 and nurtured them over the years into an Eastern blackball powerhouse. Greenlee was a gangster who ran the numbers racket in Pittsburgh. He owned a successful and glamorous nightclub, the Crawford Grill, and an equally glamorous baseball team, the Pittsburgh Crawfords. A lot of the Crawfords' glamour came at the Grays' expense. In a series of expensive raids, Greenlee pilfered blackball's three greatest stars from their crosstown rivals, Oscar Charleston, Satchel Paige, and a young up-and-comer named Josh Gibson. In addition, Gus built Greenlee Field in Pittsburgh's Hill District in 1932, a black-owned, black-built, and black-operated ballpark for black baseball, which was a remarkable feat in the middle of the Depression. We take certain amenities for granted today, but in 1934, Greenlee Field was the only ballpark in Pittsburgh where black players could use the clubhouse and showers. Posey had a regular column in the Pittsburgh Courier in 1934 called Posey's Pointed Paragraphs, in which he regularly attacked Greenlee and the league he founded. Greenlee replied in a series of articles written by his mouthpiece, League Secretary John Clark. Their exchanges kept the rivalry between the two teams up front in readers' minds. The clubs rarely played each other, and so far never more than once a season. So when they did meet, it was the biggest event in Black Pittsburgh. And no meetings were more highly anticipated than the 1934 4th of July doubleheader at Greenlee Field. And with the spotlight at its brightest, in front of the largest crowd in the ballpark's young history, what do you think happened? This happened. The sport's greatest showman rose to the occasion with a 17-strikeout no-hitter in the opener of the Twin Bill. The game was page one news in the next week's Courier with a banner headline proclaiming Satchel's historic dominance. The paper ran photos of the event, the overflow crowd, a play at the plate involving Oscar Charleston, and the man of the hour, Satchel Paige, shaking hands with his boss, Gus Greenlee. Buried deep in the sports section, continued from page one, were a few scant details of Homestead's victory over the Craws in the second game of that holiday doubleheader. And that's the way it was for the Homestead Grays in 1934. Even when they broke even on the diamond, the Grays couldn't compete with the Crawfords' glamour. Now let's take a look at the Negro National League's reorganization for the second half of the split season. As we discussed in part one of this series, the Chicago American Giants won the first half championship. At the same time that the Giants were clinching the title, the Negro National League's movers and shakers were meeting in Philadelphia to prepare for the second half, which was scheduled to begin later that same week. The biggest announcement to come out of the meeting was the expansion of the league by two teams, the Baltimore Black Sox and Backrack Giants. The Black Sox and Backracks were two legendary names in Eastern blackball, mainstays of the Eastern Colored League of the 1920s. Both clubs collapsed during the Depression, and the additions that joined the NNL in 1934 were pale imitations of these once proud clubs, attempting to use established brand names to sell a vastly inferior product. The Black Sox name was purchased from Joe Cambria by Jack Farrell, a businessman from Chester, Pennsylvania. Though they claimed Baltimore as their home, they would wind up playing just one game in the city, completing the rest of their brief home schedule in their owner's hometown of Chester. Managing the Sox was Rap Dixon, still recovering from the back injury that led to his preseason release from the Philadelphia Stars. The original Backrack Giants were based in Atlantic City, New Jersey. This attempt at resurrecting the franchise made their home in Philadelphia, where the owner, promoter Harry Payson, owned a ballpark which Ed Bolden's Stars had been using this season. The Backrack's manager was one of Bolden's old Hilldale favorites, outfielder Otto Briggs. Also announced at the owners' meeting, a second edition of the East-West All-Star Game, to be held once again at Chicago's Comiskey Park. As with the inaugural East-West Classic, the starting lineups would be selected by a vote of the fans. And finally, the owners released a schedule for the second half campaign. They attempted to produce a more balanced schedule than that employed in the first half, though as always there were difficulties. Most prominent among them this time was the decision by the other clubs that they did not want to make the long trip to Nashville, forcing the Elite Giants to become exclusively a road team for the second half. In the event, a good portion of this idealized schedule was never played. As was almost always the case, as the season wore on, there were better ways for clubs to make a buck than to play the same opponents over and over. In part one of this series, I shared cartoons created by a man named George Lee that were published by the Chicago Defender during the season. I'm delighted to offer you another batch of these beautiful pieces, published during the second half. Here's the American Giants Hall of Fame left-hander, Willie Foster. The second baseman for Chicago, Jack Marshall. Speedball Ted Trent of the American Giants. And here's George Lee's take on the great Satchel Paige. The uncrowned king of the infielders, Crawford's second baseman Chester Williams. The great entertainer Bill Bojangles Robinson, who was also part owner of the New York Black Yankees. And finally, American Giants third baseman Alex Radcliffe. Now let's take a look at one of the biggest stories of the year in blackball, the 1934 Denver Post Tournament. The Denver Post newspaper annually hosted the nation's most prestigious semi-pro baseball tournament. It started in 1915 with that first edition involving 8 Colorado-based teams. By the 1930s, the tourney had become national in scope, with as many as 20 teams competing for large cash prizes in what had become known as the Little World Series of the West. In 1934, Denver's Little World Series made headlines by becoming the first major baseball competition in the United States to integrate. Or, as the black newspaper, the Atlanta Daily World, put it, Negro baseball nines to get chance against O'Fays. If you aren't familiar with the word O'Fay, I suggest you look it up. The Kansas City Monarchs immediately entered the tournament. Since the collapse of the original Negro National League, the Monarchs had been playing independent ball, unaffiliated with any league. That independence made them the perfect candidate to travel to Denver to integrate the post tournament. The Monarchs' regular traveling partners, the bearded House of David team, also entered the tournament. During the Depression, the Kansas City Monarchs and House of David regularly barnstormed the West together, setting up a portable lighting system and facing off against each other in dozens of small cities and towns. The House of David was a religious group from Benton Harbor, Michigan, who sponsored a sensational baseball team that was also something of a traveling carnival. The team's manager was the legendary pitcher Grover Cleveland Alexander on the left. Babe Diedrichson on the right was an Olympic hero and the world's greatest female athlete, and often pitched an inning for the team. And the club also played pre-game exhibitions of donkey ball, which was baseball played while riding donkeys. If the newspaper reports of the day are to be believed, the general public in 1934 found the stubborn inaction of donkey ball to be absolutely hysterical. For the post-tournament, the Monarchs arranged the loan of two of the Chicago American Giants' biggest stars, future Hall of Famers Bill Foster and Turkey Stearns, as supplements to their roster. Never to be outdone, Crawford's boss Gus Greenlee arranged a deal of his own and loaned the House of David the sensational Satchel Paige, along with Satch's longtime personal catcher Bill Perkins. Paige and Perkins were escorted to Denver by Gus Greenlee's brother Jack, presumably sent along to ensure the unreliable Paige returned to Pittsburgh after the tournament. 18 teams were entered in the double elimination affair, which ran for 2 weeks beginning August 1st. Besides the Monarchs and House of David, there were several industrial and company teams like the Humble Oilers, Eason Oilers, and Pacific Fruit Express. There were also a few town teams, including 3 from Nebraska. The defending champions were M&O Cigars, representing Los Angeles this year. And 4 teams from Denver emerged from a qualifying tournament to participate in the main event. On opening night, the Monarchs made a strong impression while defeating the Greeley, Colorado Advertisers 12-1. It's only the beginning, folk, but you can paste it in the back of your hat band that the Kansas City Monarchs are the team to beat in this 19th annual Denver Post tournament. Yes, sirree, neighbors, these colored lads representing the finest ebony talent in the land have a ball club. The Post continued, it wasn't so much the one-sided score that sent the fans out into the night singing their praises. It was their all-around class in every department, with emphasis on pitching and speed on the base paths. Pitcher Chet Brewer, pictured here, struck out 19 that night, and the Monarchs stole 10 bases off the helpless Greeley catcher. In their following contests, Kansas City had a much rougher go of things. They were actually trailing in the 7th to the Denver Athletic Club before Bullet Rogan swiped home on the back end of a double steal to tally the game-winning run. And Schneider Jewelry of Kansas City, Kansas took the Monarchs to extra innings before first baseman George Giles drove in Turkey Stearns with a walk-off base hit. Meanwhile, the House of David had an easier go of things. They clobbered Italian Bakery of Denver in their opener 16-0. Ace Satchel Paige didn't start in that game, but did create a stir when he came on to pitch the 9th. When he took the mound, Paige dramatically called his outfielders into the infield and kept the outfield unprotected while securing the final outs. Paige started the House of David's second game against the strong Eason Oilers side and struck out 14 en route to an easy 6-1 victory. Just 2 days later, Paige, now referred to in the Post as the Chocolate Whiz-Bang, threw a 5-hit shutout with 17 strikeouts against the humble Texas Oilers. That left House of David and the Monarchs as the only remaining undefeated teams in the double elimination tournament. They would face off in round 4 on a Friday night, with the great Paige expected to make his 3rd start in 5 days. And the great Paige delivered, defeating Chet Brewer 2-1 before the largest crowd in Merchants Park history. Fans surrounded the field and were perched on the outfield fences. Thousands of others were turned away. Satchel struck out 12, bringing his totals for the tournament to 44 strikeouts in 28 innings pitched against just 1 base on balls. The contest's other standout was Turkey Stearns, who doubled and made, quote, the greatest play of the tournament, to rob an extra base hit in center field. That put House of David in the driver's seat, and they continued their undefeated ways with 2 more wins. The Bearded Beauties, as they were now being called, scored 6 runs in the 9th to beat United Fuel of Denver on a walk-off inside the park home run, and then took advantage of 4 humble errors to defeat the Oilers 8-2. Satchel Paige did not appear in either game. Meanwhile, the Monarchs were once again challenged, this time in an elimination game against the Easton Oilers. Willie Foster made his first appearance of the tournament in relief. You'll remember he'd been loaned to the Monarchs by the American Giants and was expected to be the club's ace in this tournament. The Chicago defender made comments all season long about Foster pitching injured, and presumably that ailment caught up with him in Denver, limiting him to just this one outing. Turkey Stearns again amazed with a pair of hits and two more spectacular catches. And that set up a Monday night championship showdown between the two rivals. House of David would win the championship with a victory, while the Monarchs would need to sweep a doubleheader to claim the crown. With Satchel Paige held out for a potential Game 2 decider, a pitcher named Spike Hunter shut out the Monarchs to win House of David the title by the score of 2-0. In the eighth inning, House of David center fielder Mel Ingram turned the tables on Turkey Stearns by making a sensational catch that robbed Stearns of both the two-base hit and the tournament batting title. The newspaper declared the tournament the greatest in the event's 19-year history. It was the best attended tournament, which led to the largest prizes yet awarded: $6,400 for House of David, $4,800 for the Monarchs. That's per team, not player, and we don't know how much went to Robert Cole and Gus Greenlee for their respective loans. The greatness of the event owed a lot, of course, to the decision to integrate, and this was reflected in the prizes awarded at the tournament's conclusion. Satchel Paige won a percolator set as best pitcher, while Turkey Stearns was given a wristwatch as most outstanding player, a travel bag as leading outfielder, and a Bill Doak glove for most sensational play. The 34 Denver Post tournament was an important milestone on the long road to integration. There were a few other events during the season that illustrate some of the highs and lows of that journey. The Pittsburgh Courier asked its readers, "Are you willing to pay $1 to maintain your self-respect?" It was a plea to contribute to the defense fund of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The defense fund was used to provide legal aid to victims of discrimination, and raising money for the fund was a pet project of the Courier throughout 1934. One popular way to raise money for the fund was through big benefits that were held in cities across the country. The Apollo Theater in Harlem hosted one such benefit, which featured the talents of Ethel Waters, Bilbo Jangles Robinson, and Heidi Homan Cab Calloway and his orchestra, among others. The Courier also called upon Negro League Baseball to do its share by hosting Defense Fund benefit games. I've managed to find 3 such games in which Black teams donated at least a portion of their take to the cause. The first took place in Columbus, Ohio, a city that otherwise hosted little or no Negro League games this season. The Pittsburgh Crawfords defeated the Backrack Giants 9-7 on Leroy Morney's walk-off homer. At Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, the Homestead Grays defeated a multiracial squad from Indiana called the Fort Wayne Berghoffs in another NAACP benefit. 48-year-old Smokey Joe Williams came out of retirement to start the game for the Grays. He pitched 2 scoreless innings, allowed 2 singles, and struck out the first batter he faced. The Berghoff starting pitcher was another legendary hurler from the past, Cuban ace Juan Padron. The third NAACP Defense Fund benefit game I've uncovered was held in Louisville between 2 minor Black clubs, which suggests to me that such benefits may have been held on a smaller scale throughout the country. A step backwards on the road to integration was the American Legion Eastern States Championship Tournament. The team from Springfield, Massachusetts included a Black pitcher named Ernest Taliaferro. Teams from Cumberland, Maryland, and Tampa, Florida, protested Taliaferro's presence and threatened to withdraw from the tournament if the Black player was allowed to play. In the end, of course, it was the Springfield team that was forced to withdraw amidst threats of violence if they took the field. In Canada, a team called the Chatham Colored All-Stars won the Ontario Baseball Amateur Association's intermediate level championship, making them the first all-black team to win a Canadian provisional title. The All-Stars faced the usual mix of segregation, discrimination, and violence on their way to the crown. Their story is chronicled in a book by Heidi L.M. Jacobs that I'm anxious to get my hands on. Two of the team's stars, Earl Flat Chase and Wilfred Boomer Harding, were said to be major league caliber players. The team also featured a pitcher named Ferguson Jenkins Sr., father of the future Hall of Famer. And finally, a highly publicized game was held at Brooklyn's Ebbets Field between teams of white and black semi-pro players as selected by the fans in New York. The black team triumphed 11-10 after a 3-run ninth-inning rally. The contest was widely publicized and considered so significant that even the stodgy New York Times, which routinely ignored black baseball, reported on the game. Next, a chronic problem for black baseball, which the newspapers labeled rowdyism. Commissioner Rollo Wilson bans rowdyism in baseball. Bulletin. Commissioner W. Rollo Wilson took a determined stand against rowdyism in Negro baseball here Saturday and declared that offending players would be severely punished. Rowdyism among ball players drives away spectators and consequently lessens the ability of club owners to pay good salaries. For years, I have preached against it and will always punish any league ball player who, in a league game, defies the conventions. Negro baseball can be no better than its most unruly player. He is the one who is chosen by its enemies as typical of the group. Rollo Wilson was specifically referring here to attacks on umpires and took several measures during the second half of the season to address the problem. American Giants second baseman Jack Marshall was handed a 3-game suspension and fined $10 for shoving an umpire during a game on July 7th. Several similar suspensions were also handed out, most notably to Philadelphia superstar Judd Wilson. Boojum was also suspended 3 games and fined $10 after striking the umpire in a game at Passon Field. Unfortunately, this issue would return in the league championship series, as we'll see in part 3 of this series. In February, I did an in-depth exploration of the 1934 East-West game and the pageant that preceded it, which you can view on my YouTube channel. But I did want to mention the game again here because it was by far the most talked about event of the black baseball season. For the full 7 weeks leading up to the game, both the Chicago Defender and Pittsburgh Courier ran banner headlines promoting the upcoming contest from every conceivable angle. East-West game answers fans' demands, seen as economic boom, society to add color to East-West Classic, and our girl reporter has her say, to mention just a few. The most spirited discussions were reserved for the fan vote to select the starters for the contest. The voting was done by mail. Fans clipped ballots from their local black newspaper and mailed them back to the paper for tabulation. For an underprivileged and disenfranchised population to be given a say in anything was a rare experience, and thousands of ballots were cast. The running tallies were published each week alongside articles handicapping the races at each position. This is the final vote tally for the East. The leading vote getter was Satchel Paige with 6,948. First baseman Oscar Charleston was the only other player over 6,000, though Philly star slugger Judd Wilson fell just 6 shy. The closest race was in left field, where Vic Harris bested Fats Jenkins by just 43 votes. For some inexplicable reason, the vote tallies in the East ran in the thousands, while those in the West ran in the tens of thousands. This didn't happen in other seasons, just 1934, and I have no idea why. Regardless, the West's leading vote getter was Chicago's ace Willie Foster with 48,957. Shortstop Willie Wells and Monarchs pitcher Chet Brewer also topped 48,000, while Turkey Stearns was the next highest ranking position player. The closest race was at first base, where Mule Suttles bested Kansas City's George Giles by 824 votes. For the second year running, the East-West game was held in Chicago alongside the World's Fair. The night before the game, a pageant celebrating the African-American experience drew 65,000 to Soldier Field. Thousands of those same people made the trek to Comiskey Park the following day for the big game. The starting pitchers were Chicago's Ted Trent for the West and the sensational Slim Jones of Philadelphia for the East, and they each threw 3 shutout innings with 4 strikeouts. In the top of the 6th, with the game still scoreless, Willie Wells led off with a hard grounder that hit the third base bag and bounded into left field for a double. To the delight of fans, the great Satchel Paige was summoned from the bullpen to put out the fire. Paige proceeded to retire the West's 2, 3, and 4 hitters, Alex Radcliffe, Turkey Stearns, and Mule Suttles, to preserve the shutout. In the top of the 8th, Cool Papa Bell drew a walk off Willie Foster, stole second, and scored on a Judd Wilson single. It would be the only run of the game, as Paige easily shut down the West in the 7th, 8th, and 9th. The undeniable stars of this All-Star Classic were the 6 pitchers, who combined over 18 innings to allow just 1 run on 15 hits with 3 walks and 16 strikeouts, all against the best hitters in blackball. But the black press had little doubt whose star shone the brightest, as Speedball Satchel Paige ambled into the East-West game and simply stole the show. The first magazine devoted exclusively to black sports was Colored Baseball and Sports Monthly, which debuted in September of 1934. That inaugural issue is available in the digital collection on the Baseball Hall of Fame website, allowing us to take a look inside. The cover featured a photograph of the New York Black Yankees starting outfield, Clint Thomas, Fats Jenkins, and Clyde Spearman. I particularly like the tagline along the bottom, which is not an exaggeration, the only publication of its kind in the world. Dedication to Rube Foster and C.I. Taylor, 2 men whose lives were sacrificed in the interest of the national pastime baseball, and whose memories remain an inspiration to aspiring athletes of the nation. This magazine is affectionately dedicated. The founder and editor of Colored Baseball and Sports Monthly was a college-educated former Birmingham Black Barons first baseman named Nat Trammell. Here he asks, will colored players enter the major league? He replied, there were colored athletes in other sports, and the attendance records seem to have been greater when they appeared. Colored actors appear at the big theaters, and they pack them in. They appear in opera and most every other profession where there is an expression for entertainment and showmanship. So why shouldn't they appear in major baseball, tennis, and golf? Peering into the future and seeing not only Jackie, but Serena and Tiger as well. Not bad, Mr. Trammell. The owner of the New York Black Yankees, James Semler, contributed a history of his ball club, which was featured in several photos throughout the magazine. There would be one more issue of Colored Baseball and Sports Monthly before it went under. Unfortunately, that one hasn't been digitized, so all I've been able to find is the cover, featuring managers Oscar Charleston and Dick Lundy. Nat Trammell couldn't sell enough copies at 15 cents apiece to stay in publication, but today a single copy fetches $3,000 to $4,000 in auction. Now let's take a look at a few interesting highlights of the season's second half. One of the games of the year took place at Coles Park in Chicago on Sunday, July 8th. Shug Cornelius of the American Giants threw 9 no-hit innings against the Pittsburgh Crawfords. Unfortunately for Cornelius, his opponent was Satchel Paige, who shut out the American Giants over those same 9 innings. Cornelius tired in the 10th, allowing 3 runs on 5 hits to lose both the no-hitter and the ball game. Sadly, I can't find any details of that faithful 10th. Not baseball, but noteworthy. Just 3 days after Cornelius's no-hitter, Chicago hosted the first professional fight for Poker Face Joe Louis, for whom the black press expected great things. I suspect there were a number of fans who attended both events. It took Louis just 74 seconds to dispatch his opponent, the first victim of many. On July 14th, the Stars swept the Crawfords in a Saturday doubleheader. Satchel Paige was once again the big story, but this time for the wrong reasons. From the Courier. Coming to bat in the 6th inning, Paige disgusted local fans and angered his own manager, Charleston, to such an extent that he was lifted from the game and Kincannon finished the battle. With 2 down, Paige hit a high bounder toward the pitching box. It escaped McDonald's grasp and landed back of him. Say, rushing in, fumbled the ball, and it got away from him. Meanwhile, where was Paige? He had turned back to the bench after hitting the ball and made no attempt to run to first. Any player in uniform might have beaten the throw when Say finally captured the pellet. In August, Barron's midnight game set. Pittsburgh Crawfords take on Birmingham Black Barons under portable lights. The game starts at 12:01 Sunday midnight and looms as the most entertaining baseball novelty that Bedford Avenue enclosure has offered since 1932. At that time, the midnight game drew the largest crowd of the year. Unsurprisingly, I haven't been able to track down a newspaper account of the hours contest, but I enjoy imagining the sort of crowd that showed up for a midnight Saturday night ball game. And finally, the latest skirmish in the Pittsburgh baseball wars. Gus Greenlee canceled the Crawford scheduled Labor Day doubleheader with the Homestead Grays. Greenlee had been insisting to Posey all season that the Grays' standing as league affiliates would be jeopardized if the Grays played a game at Forbes Field, home of the Pirates. When Homestead played that NAACP benefit at Forbes, Greenlee retaliated, and the fans were denied a rematch of the 4th of July's fireworks. Lastly, let's take a look at the second half pennant race, which the Philadelphia Stars dominated wire to wire. On August 11th, 6 weeks into the second half, Slim Jones shut out the Backrack Giants in what the papers called Philadelphia's 9th straight victory. It gave the Stars a 9-0 second half record and commanding lead position in the league standings. I wanted to present a recap of those 9 games that won Philadelphia the half pennant, but identifying them is nearly impossible. The excellent Sabre book on the 34 Stars has a well-researched day-by-day recap of the season. Here are the Stars games against league opponents from the start of the second half up to that so-called 9th straight victory. It was actually Philadelphia's 11th straight win, giving them 13 wins against 1 loss. The frustrating reality of Negro League ball is that not every game between league opponents counted in the standings as a league game. Even the teams and players had a hard time knowing which games were official contests. The result is that the Stars' 9-game winning streak is somewhere on this chart, but identifying which 9 were the 9 is anyone's guess. Slim Jones continued to shine during those 6 weeks, accounting for 7 victories, including 3 shutouts. It's worth noting that 3 of those starts were against the non-league New York Black Yankees. The Black Yanks were a pretty good draw that year, and starting Slim Jones again against them was good business sense, league standings be damned. In his best start on July 19th, Jones one-hit the back-racks, striking out 9. Slim also made an impression with his bat, driving in the winning run in a 3-2 victory over New York and homering off Ted Trent in a rematch with the Black Yanks 2 weeks later. But Slim wasn't the only standout during the Stars' pennant run. From left to right, Judd Boojum Wilson was one of the game's best hitters and routinely figured in the highlights. Center fielder Pete Washington played a sensational center field and also led the team in homers. Left fielder Cheney White was called Reindeer because of his prowess on the base paths and demonstrated that ability on July 5th by scoring from second base on a force out for the only run in Slim Jones' 1-0 win over Bill Holland in New York. And 2 other pitchers besides Jones made important contributions. Manager and submarine hurler Webster McDonald, and 23-year-old right-hander Rocky Ellis, who had served as a bat boy for Ed Bolden's Hilldale Club a decade earlier. After that 9th straight win, the Stars played a 6-game set against the Pittsburgh Crawfords. Philly won the first 2, extending the mythical winning streak to 11, but the Craws came back to win the next 4 behind stellar play from their marquee stars, Satchel Paige, Oscar Charleston, and Josh Gibson. The standings after that 6-game series showed Philadelphia still in first, but Pittsburgh, who'd played 9 more games, was technically just 1/2 game behind the Stars with 2 weeks left in the season. But the irregularities of the league schedule gave the Crawfords little opportunity to make up that difference. Philadelphia had 4 games left to play, but Pittsburgh only had 2, which put the Stars in control of their own destiny. They seized that advantage by sweeping a doubleheader with Nashville behind outstanding pitching from McDonald and Frank Lefty Holmes, then beat and tied the American Giants as the Chicago defender sang a familiar refrain, "Cornelius pitches well, but mates fail to hit Mr. Jones." Meanwhile, the Craws split a Labor Day doubleheader with Chicago to close out their campaign. The final standings show Philadelphia comfortably in front with an outstanding .789 winning percentage, followed by Pittsburgh, Chicago, and Nashville. The back half of the league didn't play often and played poorly when they did. Special shout out to Rap Dixon's Baltimore Black Sox, who failed to win an official league game in 9 tries. The cumulative standings combining the 2 half seasons show the big 3 teams neck and neck, separated by just 2 games. But the 2 half season champions, Philadelphia and Chicago, were also the teams with the best overall records. The Pittsburgh Crawfords were undoubtedly more glamorous, but the correct 2 teams qualified for the league championship series. And that's where we'll pick up with that championship series and other autumn baseball in part 3 of this series a couple months from now. Among my sources for this presentation, the ever-present biographical encyclopedia by Jim Riley, that excellent Sabre book, The Stars Shone on Philadelphia, edited by Frederick Bush and Bill Nolan, Jay Sanford, another Sabre publication, A History of the Denver Post Tournament. Websites included the Sabre Bio Project and Games Project. All the statistics and portraits came from seamheads.com, the clippings from newspapers.com, ProQuest Historical Black Newspapers, and the resources at the Cleveland Public Library. My most important resource is a pair of scrapbooks I assembled some 35 years ago, containing coverage of 1934 in the 2 leading black newspapers of the time, the Pittsburgh Courier and Chicago Defender. I'd like to thank our collaborators, Community Cup Classic Foundation, Lifeline Sports, P5, The Partnership, and yours truly. And special thanks to our most valuable partner, Cuyahoga Arts and Culture.